Today we're testing Resident Evil Requiem on the AYN Odin 3. I'm running this on the lowest possible settings the game has to offer with FSR 3 set to performance, and initially I'm not going to turn on frame generation so we can see what the base performance looks like. Now this is running through Gamehub 535 and I also have super resolution set to sharpen 3. Now, I actually had quite a lot of issues trying to get this game running on Gamehub. I also tried running it through Game Native and Gamehub Lite, but the game uses DirectX 12, and currently there are quite a few issues with DirectX 12 titles on Gamehub. If you test games on these devices, you've probably noticed that already. Another issue is that the game has certain preferences for specific Proton layers. Even on the Steam Deck, you can run into problems if you're not using the correct Proton version. On the deck, the recommended one right now is Proton 10-4, and here on Gamehub, we're using Proton 10, which is basically the only option available. Immediately, I run into an issue. The game doesn't properly go full screen. No matter what I tried, whether it's borderless, windowed, or forcing full screen through the AYN settings, it still doesn't scale correctly, so some parts of the screen at the bottom are actually cut off. So I've started a new game here, and right away you can see there are quite a few issues. In terms of FPS, we're getting somewhere between 15 and 30, but most of the time it's closer to 15 FPS or even lower than that. But performance actually isn't the biggest problem here. The main issue is missing assets and missing graphics. For example, in this opening scene, you can clearly see inside this car. In a weird way, it's almost like a bonus because you can see that developers cared enough to actually model some interior details, seats and all of that. And even though players would normally never see them, but obviously that's not intentional, it's happening because a lot of the outside textures simply aren't loading, and this is mostly an issue with the drivers. That's basically the main theme here when trying to run this game on the Odin 3 right now. It's going to be missing assets. Regardless of which Turnip driver you try, and believe me, I tried more than 10 or 15 different versions, the biggest issue was always missing assets. There's probably a way to get this to work, to tweak it specifically for this game, but I'm not going to do that, and you'll see why later. Now, once we move indoors or into smaller spaces, the game actually starts running a little bit better. Even outside, we're sometimes seeing around 30 FPS, again with FSR set to performance, which isn't terrible, but visually the game looks pretty rough. I didn't have a chance to try FSR 4 on the Odin 3. On the Steam Deck, you can easily swap the FSR version by replacing a file, but here that actually breaks the game, so I wasn't able to test it. Once we get inside, I'm actually going to turn on frame generation, which pushes the frame rate closer to 60 FPS. And now keep in mind, the frame generation here is working from a base of around 35 to 40 FPS indoors, so it can actually feel surprisingly playable. There is still some stuttering and hitching, which you can see on screen, but the input lag is actually fairly manageable, it's barely noticeable. However, again, the missing textures make it basically impossible to properly play the game. You can see entire walls missing in some areas. You can sort of treat this like a wall hack even. I've already been through this section a couple of times, so I know where to go, but if you were trying to play normally like this, it would be extremely difficult. In terms of power usage, we're looking at around 15 to 19 watts on the Odin 3, and that puts battery life at roughly 2 hours and 45 minutes, maybe close to 3 hours on a full charge. I also want to briefly talk about temperatures because I see a lot of confusion about this online. After the recent AYN OTP update a couple of weeks ago, the temperature shown in Gamehub is now the actual SoC temperature from the sensor located directly on the Snapdragon 8 Elite. So when you see something like 94 degrees or even up to 102 degrees, that's not the temperature of the whole device, that's just the CPU sensor. So if you monitor a desktop CPU using something like HW monitor, for example, seeing temperatures around 90 degrees during heavy workloads is completely normal. The Snapdragon 8 Elite is rated up to 105 degrees Celsius, so this is still within the safe operating range. The temperature of the actual device chassis is usually somewhere around 50 to 65 degrees. So while it is pretty concerning to see that big of a number like 102 degrees Celsius, you should know that this isn't actually that harmful for your device. Now here in this part, you can start to see the frame generation hitching I mentioned earlier. The game tries to hold around 60 FPS, but you get these small jumps and stutters as the generated frames struggle to keep up. Sometimes when interacting with objects, you even see the screen flashing or brief black frames, which again is caused by frame generation, so it's definitely not the best way to experience this game. And I often get comments asking how anyone can enjoy playing a game like this on the Odin 3, and the truth is I don't, and I don't play these games on the Odin 3. I make videos like this mostly to showcase what is technically possible right now. It's about showing what the Snapdragon 8 Elite, the Turnip drivers, and the translation layer from FX are capable of. We're essentially running x86 Windows games on an Android-based handheld with a completely different architecture in the processor. And from a technology standpoint, that's pretty impressive. If I have to really dumb this down, the way a CPU works is we're basically forcing electricity through a rock. And the way this works is we're trying to make one rock talk to another rock that speaks completely different language. So yeah, it is pretty impressive that we can do that. And a lot of people ask if the AYN Odin 3 is a good replacement for the Steam Deck, and honestly my answer is no. Even though I made a video calling it a Steam Deck Mini and I tested 100 PC games on it, it's not really a replacement. I enjoy playing this game on my Steam Deck, but I would not enjoy playing it on the Odin 3, even if it ran at 30 FPS. The Odin 3 works great for certain types of PC games like Hades, Vampire Survivors or Balatro, but AAA titles like this aren't really where it shines. Even if I was streaming this from my PC, the screen, while it is a great 120Hz OLED display, it's still quite small for big cinematic games like this, so that's really the answer to that question. I don't play these games on my Odin 3, I'm just testing them from a technical point of view. We're going to continue through this section, and later there's a small combat area, but again, the biggest issue with running the game on the Odin 3 right now is the missing assets. This could potentially be fixed with future driver updates, but or with very specific tweaks to a driver, but I'm not really that knowledgeable when it comes to drivers, so I'm not really going to delve into that. If somebody comes up with a specific driver for it, I might test it, but considering that I'm not really going to play this on the AYN Odin 3, currently that's not an option. Now, without frame generation, you're mostly looking at below 30 FPS, which makes the experience pretty rough. I wasn't able to capture much footage from the Leon combat section because the game crashed, but even there, the game drops below 50 FPS with frame generation enabled, so it is pretty stuttery and not playable at all. Now, in terms of Gamehub settings, again, I'm running this on Proton 10, and the driver I'm using is Turnip v26.1.0 base 6, the threshold driver. I also tested a lot of others, including the latest Qualcomm driver, but the game wouldn't launch with that one. This is also running on the extreme profile inside Gamehub. That's pretty much it for this video. This isn't really meant to be a guide on how to run the game. I think you shouldn't. It's not a guide on how to improve performance on the Odin 3, because I don't think you can improve a lot. It's mostly just a showcase of where the technology currently stands when it comes to running Windows games on Android handhelds. If you found this video helpful, please consider leaving a like. If you want to see more AYN Odin 3 content, feel free to subscribe. And if you're into Steam, Steam Deck, Steam hardware, and handheld gaming in general, maybe you'll find the channel interesting as well. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.